Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed last night's show. You're really going to enjoy tonight's show. Last night, we learned about how to detoxify your body, how to get the bad guys out, how to clean out your system and flush them out. Tonight, we're going to teach you how to fill it back up with the good stuff. Because when your body's full of the good stuff, which we're going to teach you tonight, your immune system's going to work the way it's supposed to, and you're going to be able to fend off cancer the way that your body was intended to. Maybe there's people out there that think cancer is eating away at your body, and maybe it is. We're going to teach you how to eat away at cancer. Tonight's episode is going to be extremely powerful, so grab a pen and paper. You're going to want to take notes. Now, first off, I want you to listen to what Dr. Rasha Buttar has to say about alternative versus advanced medicine.
I don't call this alternative. I know some people call it. I call this advanced medicine. Why do I call it advanced medicine? Very simple. Because you've got conventional, and let's use bypass surgery as an example of something that's been around for 60 years, right? That's considered traditional, conventional. But something like acupuncture that has over 6,000 years of history is called alternative, non-conventional. So how can you take something that's only got a 50-year track record and call that traditional, and take something with 5,000 or 6,000 years of history and call that non-traditional? You see, it's a total misnomer.
Can you talk about the importance of nutrition in treating cancer? Why does it play such a big role?
Well, part of the issue with the work that we do is that as patients take the pancreatic enzymes and the enzymes work on the body, you need the body to be as strong as possible to handle that whole process, because a lot of waste materials are formed. And if you're eating, in effect, a lot of things that need to be processed and gotten rid of, like pesticide residues or sprays or waxes or chemicals, those sorts of things, we think that that just puts an extra load on the body to process and deal with that kind of thing. So you need good quality food to be able to have the energy to fight the cancer and to get rid of the waste materials as the enzymes work on cancer. And certainly, I think that nutritional issues can have a big part of why people get cancer in the first place. So it doesn't make sense to think that an illness that's created by a lifestyle can be managed without modifying that lifestyle. In other words, why would you want to go back to the same lifestyle that got you to where you didn't want to be?
What you eat and drink is digested, right? And it becomes your blood composition.
Yeah.
Your blood is made of what you eat and drink. And people say, yeah, I get that. Okay, great. Unless you think your blood is made magically, which it doesn't happen.
Right.
So then your blood circulates throughout your body. Your blood brings the materials that then become your organs, that fuel your brain, your cognitive function, that fuel the function of all your organs. Mm-hmm. And that replenish and rebuild all the cells of your body. As you lose cells, you build new cells, you replace cells. So clearly what's in your blood becomes your physical body, right? And they say, yeah, right, I get that. So then, you literally are what you eat physically. It's an inescapable conclusion. So if you're eating junk, if you're eating toxins, if you're eating heavy metals, your body, your brain, your organs, your skin, everything that's in your physical body becomes junk, becomes toxic, becomes processed, not natural. That idea is not yet recognized by the entire system of modern medicine, with all its claimed advances, with all the billions of dollars that have gone into the cancer research industry. Yeah. They still cannot yet grasp a simple concept that a 5-year-old understands almost automatically. You are what you eat.
Most any cancer doctor now that uses this, what we call alternative therapies, to any degree of success, the first thing that they will have patients do is change what you eat. You got to change that internal environment, right? So you can give these cells the heads up that you're not going to have to try to survive in a toxic environment anymore. When that happens, then they start to pleomorph back into normal cells, because it's much easier physiologically to live as a normal cell, right? Normal cells go through what we call oxidative phosphorylation, which means you take oxygen, you take sugar, and you make 32 molecules of this ATP, which is our energy currency, right?
You said oxidative phosphorylation.
Oxidative phosphorylation, okay. Right? So we take oxygen, and through this process we add a phosphorus to this ATP, and that's our energy currency, right? That's how we move about. And the more ATP, the better, right? So if you're a cell that is able to undergo oxidative phosphorylation, and again, you're able to do that because a set of genes is turned on, you have to go through what's called the Krebs cycle, then that's a happy state, right? If you have to move to this anaerobic, what we call anaerobic metabolism, for every molecule of glucose, you can't get 32 ATP anymore. You can only get 2 molecules of ATP, right?
Right. And,
so
and anaerobic means?
Anaerobic means you don't have to have oxygen.
Okay.
Right? That means that I can survive without oxygen, right? Which makes me able to survive in a more toxic environment, but it makes my energy level a lot more restricted. So then that's why cancer cells are so ravenous about having to absorb sugar, right? Because they can only make 2 ATP per molecule.
Because cancer cells love sugar. You hear that phrase all the time, and that explains why that phrase came about.
Correct. One of the tests that we use to diagnose cancer is a PET scan. So with a PET scan, we take radiated sugar, right, and we inject it in you. Because cancer cells take up sugar so much more efficiently than normal cells, they will take up that radiated sugar, and then we're able to see on the CAT scan where the sugar is, which that tells us where the cancer is, right? So we're very aware of the dependence on cancer cells for prodigious amounts of sugar, and that's why, again, cancer patients die of starvation, is because the cancer cells will suck up all the sugar from normal cells.
That leads me to the question then: when you see a cancer patient, and what is it called when a cancer patient dies of starvation? It's
cachexia.
Cachexia.
Right.
It's called cachexia. When you see a patient that has cachexia, and let's say their oncologist says, you're wasting away, go out and eat anything you want, is that wise advice?
That's like you being stranded in the middle of the ocean and thirsty, and you drink salt water.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how many patients that I've dealt with over the years that have come and said, I'm losing weight, I'm in the cachexia cycle.
Right.
And my oncologist has told me to go eat ice cream, cake, whatever will put the weight on me.
Right.
So in other words,
that's gasoline on the fire.
Superfood nutrition is a concept that I started working on in the 90s. And I wrote actually my first white paper on the subject, which I call the 4 corners of optimal nutrition at that point. Now we refer to it as 4 corners of superfood nutrition, because the piece of superfood nutrition is so interesting, is that superfood nutrition, as we have defined it, is that we know in health that there are something on the order of 50 to 53, depends on how you slice them. By that I mean, some people will argue about how many essential vitamins there are, how many essential minerals there are, and some people will say there's 9 essential amino acids, when others will say there's 10, and if you add conditionally essentials, there might be 12. So depending on how you slice it though, these things called essential, or in this case dietary essential, means you have to get them from your diet in order to get them. The body can do anything and make the non-essentials. Now, technically they're all essential, but the dietary essentials you must consume for the body to use that as raw material to make the other things that your body needs. And so if you're not getting those 50 plus essential nutrients in your diet, then you're going to have physiologic consequences as a result. The 4 corners would start with calorie restriction with optimal nutrition. Now, years ago, you may remember the Biosphere project with Dr. Roy Wolford, UCLA. They were in the Biosphere, and the whole thing was about they were going to grow the food that they used. And so it's going to be a self-sustained environment, and they weren't getting anything in or out of it. They'd have to grow what they needed. Well, they ended up growing. They had something go wrong, and they couldn't grow enough food for them. So they had to ration what they ate to have less food. And while they were hungry and all, they found remarkable physiological and psychological changes that were very positive, and that really spawned the whole calorie restriction movement, the calorie restriction, fasting movement, and so on. So calorie restriction with optimal nutrition, there's now been more than 2,000 studies in virtually every organism, single cell organism, all the way up to primates and even in humans now, that suggest that this is positive for physiology, that it actually is kind of like, if you would say, if there was a fountain of youth, it will be extend life, delay disease, enhance performance, optimize weight, increase mental clarity, and start going down the list of things that were beneficial from doing this approach. And when you now take calorie restriction and you add optimal nutrition, most people would agree that if you eat less calories, but you max out the nutrients and get all these 51 that we're talking about at the same time, that it has got to be better for you than either eating a lot of calorically dense food or a little teeny bit of calorically dense food. You see what I'm saying? So that piece is a very important piece of the puzzle. There's a really cool study in Journal of Nutrition in 2001. It's 4 groups of mice, genetically altered mice, altered to be more susceptible to disease. So the first group of mice was, they call it the all-you-could-eat group. So they gave it all the food it could eat all the time, so it grazed all the time. They also added corn oil to the situation. So these mice lived an average of 232 days. So 232 on the average. And so the second group, same kind of mice, same feeding method, but all they did was, instead of corn oil, they gave fish oil. Okay, fish oil, and they lived an average of 100 days longer. Okay, just adding the fish oil. There's still garbage food underneath if you think about it. So the third group was the calorie restriction group, where they take the same food, same feeding method, but they actually cut the calorie of the food by 40%. They lived an average of 200 days longer than the 232-day controls, just by eating less of the unhealthy food they were eating. Okay, and the last of the four groups was the calorie restriction group combined with fish oil, and this group lived an average of 400 days longer than a 232-day control, so 600 and something days versus 200 and something days. So that's a fascinating little study, and I always say, if you're a mouse, you really ought to be thinking about this kind of nutrition. But anyway, now this does translate in a lot of ways. It just shows how high impact that nutrition could actually be.
There was a very important study in 2004 called the Suvamax study. Suvamax. And it was 13,000 participants. They gave them antioxidants because in the oncology, with the oncologists, they go, oh my God, you can't take any antioxidants. It's going to interfere with the chemo. Well, they obviously didn't read the Suvamax study because it was 13,000 people, and the one who took the antioxidant cocktail survived 31% decrease of death, not only from cancer, but other diseases. So there's incontrovertible evidence that antioxidants work way better for you if you are receiving any kind of chemotherapy and taking antioxidants.
Which is a little bit opposite of what you typically hear.
No, it's completely opposite of what you hear. So I always tell patients, please disregard that information. That would mean the doctor should tell you to drink milkshakes and McDonald's hamburgers and chicken McNuggets, because if you eat spinach, which has antioxidants, if you eat apples, which have antioxidants, and if you eat peppers, it has antioxidants. Okay, that doesn't even make logical sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
It makes no sense whatsoever. So I tell people, please disregard that. Think about what makes sense. Even Reader's Digest now tells people how to eat healthy. And don't tell me that what you eat doesn't matter. It does. That's biochemistry 101. You learn that in medical school.
You know, most cancer centers you go to today will tell you that you are not to take antioxidants during cancer treatment, because the process which we are using, they're telling you, is an oxidative process, and our goal is to use that process for your benefit to try to bring about the killing of cancer cells, so that before, so if you used antioxidants, it would essentially quench what we're trying to do. But the research does not back that up. I've now seen multiple studies, in this particular presentation, said that taking antioxidants during cancer treatment extends the patient life outcome dramatically than those who do not receive antioxidants during. Antioxidants are by nature anti-inflammatory. okay? And by nature, anti-glycatant. So in other words, anti-glycation. And by
what would that mean?
Glycation is basically caramelization of a protein. So instead of having an oxidation with oxygen, oxidizing a fat or a lipid, it's like having a sugar caramelize on top of a protein and make the protein irrelevant. Okay, advanced glycated end product. So AGE, age. So really, when you see like cross-linked old skin, what you're seeing is collagen cross-linking or advanced glycated end products, glycation. I wrote about this in my book in 2005, and I said there, in 5 years, glycation is going to be as well known as oxidation. Well, here it is, 10 years later, and it's still nobody still knows about it. But the point is simple. It is a foundational root of disease, including cancer. Oxidation, inflammation, glycation, and angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is basically getting a blood supply to an area. Say if you twist your ankle, you're going to get a massive inflammation, and then because inflammation is going to draw the angiogenesis to the area where the body will release new blood flow to that area, and then when the chronic situation is over with, or when the acute situation is over with, it will pull back the vessels and you're fine. It's the chronic angiogenesis that's the problem. And a cancer cell, most cancer cells, they will hide and then get a blood supply through angiogenesis, which is chronic angiogenesis, which is a big problem. The point I'm making here is this corner, the antioxidant corner, when you're addressing all 5 of these classes, those things actually address, they regulate these 4 major processes that underlie the disease. So if you control oxidation and inflammation and glycation and angiogenesis, a disease cannot progress. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but if you take these foundational root power of a disease away, it's going to really stunt the growth of whatever that disease is trying to do. And you can do that through nutrition. We've seen that.
We need to look also at the mineral content for the connective tissue. I talked about silica. Most of the foods, unfortunately, that we eat have been robbed of these trace elements because industry has found it much more profitable to take those minerals and use them for different reasons, and they leave us with the deficient foods. So we talk about something like silica. You could go to something like the horsetail extract, something that you could grow and make into a tea yourself, or concentrate in a whole food form from a tea. And now you have an abundance of silica, which again is one of those trace minerals so critical, and the only time you'll find it in a health food store, it's in the little beauty section for women that want to have better nails or hair or skin. And yet we ignore the fact that it's the integrity of the entire connective tissue of the body. The vascular system as well is dependent upon that humble trace element that's been removed from most foods. We talk about foods like whole grains that used to contain abundant amounts of chromium, and they've been robbed of the chromium because the soils don't contain it or industry refines it out. Chromium, why do we need that? The form that I talk about is grown as food because it manages what? Sugar, blood sugar. It helps to deliver it successfully into the cells and mobilize it out of the cells should we need it if we don't have enough coming in from external sources. And then we see as Dr. Bittar calls it, the obligate glucose metabolizer, cancer, really taking advantage of the fact that we are chromium deficient. It has access to the sugar very readily because we don't have the chromium necessary to bind it and help deliver it so the cancer cells can't get it. So that'd be another aspect. Other foods like Brazil nuts are rich in selenium, although we see as well now lower than it was. And we need, for real metabolic benefit of selenium, higher quantities than we're getting just from Brazil nuts and other foods. So concentrating the selenium in a food-grown source or form is going to be critical. Utilizing upwards of 200 micrograms a day bare minimum as preventive maintenance, but upwards of 400, 600, 800, or even 1,000 micrograms of this food-grown form of selenium to reverse the cancer like no other trace mineral can do. And rather than believe the FDA in their corrupt study of yesteryear that says selenium can be toxic to you, the form that we're talking about is not a synthetic isolate, a food-grown form. We can take large quantities without concerning ourselves with selenotoxicity, and it will greatly benefit the cancer patients almost more than anything else. Heck, read the Bible. It's the plants that were the gifts of creation and that gave us the medicines that we needed, that would nourish us. And somehow we abandoned that over the course of the last 100, 200 years. For what? for a petrochemical, ultimately a petrochemical monopoly. Again, there was funding associated, federal funding, matching funds with these so-called trusts that were very profitable. They found ways that they could convince the public through public relations campaigns to donate, for instance, to the American Cancer Society, and that they would be matched by these wealthy elites on that level that were really profiting handsomely on the back end of this and thought of us all as fools. And in fact, we were. We bought into the myth and the lies that the only way we could survive the plagues and the infectious diseases to embrace a petrochemical reality that, yes, could kill things, but could also kill all of us in the process. And we're seeing now, generations into this, as the rise of chronic disease in younger and younger children, to the point where you're seeing babies born almost in a cancerous state. And that's unacceptable to me, but I didn't know any different. And you know, the argument can be made, only it's a ridiculous argument, that the reason this is happening in children is that they're living longer than they used to. That's why there's more cancer in kids. I mean, that's absurd. Why would we have cancer in children? These are not genetic diseases any more than autism is a genetic disease, but that's a whole other story, but it relates. For me, it's very important what goes in. That means also purifying, cleaning the water. Talk about structuring the water as well, because there's an energy to water. That's why homeopathy is so amazing. That goes beyond merely filtering it and cleaning it. So there are other nuances to protecting ourselves from cancer. There's always something more to do, but at the proverbial end of the day, just do what you have genuine control over, right? You can't do that which you can. That you could turn over to God, pray on it. But that which you have control over, we are asked to do. We can't slack off on that which we have genuine control over, to choose cleaner foods, to choose cleaner waters, to not do certain things that we know are self-destructive. These are within our power. We're asked to do that. We can't abuse the privilege of life and say, well, nah, I don't want to do that one. Ultimately, we have to take control over that which we have been granted and given control over.
What does an anti-cancer diet look like in your office?
Well, we teach our patients, I'm not the nutritionist, but I do instruct patients. First of all, you have to eat foods, mostly vegetables, okay? I don't care if they eat fruits, but you have to eat a low sugar diet because cancer feeds off of sugar. Dr. Otto Warburg won a Nobel Prize, said that cancer cells thrive in a fermentative energy source, which is sugar. Sugar on the cancer cells, the receptor sites for sugar. That's how we do a PET scan. When you give a PET scan, you give it radiotrace glucose, and the cancer cells light up or they don't light up. And they light up because they're eating the sugar, or they don't. So you got to get people off sugar. People are addicted to sugar. Sugar is a poison, it's a toxin, and it paralyzes the cell from doing their job. We have this blood test called the hemoglobin A1C, which is a reflection of your blood sugar over 90 days. It is an aging marker. Your body has what they call glycosylation taking place. We know that at a certain number, with the electron microscopy, Johns Hopkins has written on this, that the cells change after a hemoglobin A1C greater than 5.0, which is considered ideal. So you have to get off sugar. I don't care how you slice it. You've got to get off. Yeah, there are people that can eat sugar and they have great blood sugars. Okay, luckily they're blessed, but most people are not. I mean, if you look at the statistics, 70, 80 million people are pre-diabetic. So that means they're already very increased risk of cancer. Then you have the diabetics. Then if you look at children, 1 in 3 children after the year 2000 have diabetes. Okay, the complications of diabetes are everything. Your eyes, your circulation, your heart, your immune system, everything is non-functional. Amputation of limbs, probably that's the #1 reason for amputation of limbs, is from high blood sugar. So you gotta get off sugar, and then you gotta get off the things that turn into sugar. So the things that turn into sugar are bread, rice, pasta, and potatoes.
What would be a diet, a general diet that you could recommend that would keep the immune system strong and prevent cancer?
So when I started working with Dr. Wright, one of the things that I had been involved with was treating people for the fungal overgrowth that happens in our body. And the thing that I started to realize, one of the things that I realized years before that, was that the common denominator of any of these natural herbal plant exotic fruit superfood remedies that worked, the common denominator with them was that they had some powerful antifungal in them, right? And that's with garlic, that's with aspirin, that's with these polyphenolic compounds in the skin of red grapes, the resveratrol. So I went into the lab and I started investigating, well, which foods are the highest in these, or not necessarily which foods are the highest, but which foods had the most impact on controlling Candida overgrowth. And so I set up Petri dishes right there in the lab, and we inoculated them with Candida, and then we just went about inoculating them then with extracts from different fruits and vegetables and so forth to see which ones made the biggest, what we call zone of exclusion in the Petri dish, right? And so we had the Petri control down here with a medication called diflucan that we know kills yeast, right? And so we knew that it was going to leave a big clear space in there, right, where it didn't allow yeast to grow. And then down here we had just water, right? And so that plate just grew white with yeast overgrowth because there was nothing to inhibit it. And then all these other plates, I was able to see, which ones worked better or worse at keeping yeast under control. So with that was the springboard for what is now called the BALI eating plan, B-A-L-I, and BALI standing for, that's an acronym for basic antioxidant / antifungal, and then low insulin. So we want to, and regardless of the name that you can call it, right, whether it's the Gerson therapy or the paleo diet or Mediterranean diet or whatever, what is going to work as far as keeping cells out of an environment that incents them to pleomorph into cancer cells is one that keeps the yeast under control, right? It keeps you from developing fungal overgrowth, because when that fungus gets up to a certain level, then your immune system is going to respond with the weapons of mass destruction, and it's going to create a toxic environment, and your cells are going to cough and choke, and they're going to start changing into a cellular form that will allow them to survive that toxic environment. So again, regardless of what you call it, the food that you eat has to be food that keeps fungal growth under control and doesn't throw gasoline on the fire. So when we eat foods that have what we call a high glycemic index, right? So the grains and sugars, right, and corn, wheat, rice, those things, then we're creating an environment, right, that promotes fungal overgrowth, right? And that's going to cause inflammation, and that's going to, again, incent cells to turn to cancer cells, right? So we have just seen that more and more as our diets have gotten more and more refined. That was started over here in the Western world. Now we see it as we have outsourced, all of our computer jobs and manufacturing jobs over to these third worlds, right? And they get money in their pocket, and then we send Coke and McDonald's over there. Now we're seeing breast cancer, for instance, in women that we didn't see breast cancer in before. We're seeing prostate cancer in men that we didn't see prostate cancer in before in these third world countries, right? And it's again because they're eating the same food that gave us the problem over here.
So what did my diet look like? It was very simple, and I think a hardcore nutritional approach to cancer needs to be very simple because there are a lot of options out there. It can get very complicated, and a lot of people they're seeing so many different directions they don't even know where to go, and they get paralyzed. And so I realized, okay, what is the most fundamental, foundational part of my healing approach, and that's food. I've got to get as much nutrition in my body as I can from the earth. And so I started juicing, and I drank about 64 ounces of vegetable juice every day, mostly carrot juice. I ate giant salads full of cruciferous and allium vegetables. That's broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, onions, garlic, peppers, right? Just spinach, all that good stuff.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Making me
just
hungry.
the amazing giant salad. We shared one at Jason's Deli recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a giant salad full of all this really amazing food from the earth that was put here for us. And I ate that twice a day. And then I would make fruit smoothies with a fresh coconut and berries, 2 cups of blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries. Berries are very potent anti-cancer fruits. And that was it. That was the daily diet. And it was every day. And I did that for 90 days. It was 100% raw food for 90 days.
But then, you know, you've got your vitamin C. You know, vitamin C is a whole therapy in itself. You shoot an IV line loaded with vitamin C, that is actually cytotoxic to cancers. And I saw a very good study on that, where at about 3 milligrams per percent, it's called 3 milligrams per 100 of mils of blood, it was actually cytotoxic to cancer cells without doing anything harmful at all to healthy cells. So you know the value of that. And it's an antioxidant, it's a detoxer. You know, if somebody's in a toxic environment, vitamin C will help that too. So, you know, if you can't find somebody who'll give you IV vitamin Cs, you can do the lipospheric vitamin C, where, you know, 1 gram in a sachet, one sachet, sorry, will give you the equivalent of 10 grams of oral vitamin C. If you just took it as a powder, that's a pretty good dose, 10 grams. 20 grams would be great.
Why does the lipospheric vitamin C work that way? How does that deliver more than you would normally get?
Well, because basically vitamin C is a bit toxic to bowel. Beyond a certain level, you get this phenomenon we call fill and flush. And we used to use that as a measure back in the 70s and 80s. You know, you take more and more vitamin C till it gives you diarrhea, and then take less. Yeah. So if 10 grams causes diarrhea, you take 8. But that will be your limit then. If you try and take any more of that, you get diarrhea, and you lose more vitamin C than you're swallowing, so it becomes counterproductive. But the lipospheric protective form does that, and because it's so completely absorbed, it delivers almost all of the vitamin C to the cell. It's not just lipospheric getting through the gut wall, right? But it's getting into the cells and, you know, taking it where it counts in the body. So it's a very, very valuable technique.
I know you're not a big fan of chemo, but let's say, I'm sure that there are millions of people watching this that are already doing chemo. Is there anything they can do nutritionally to mitigate the side effects?
That's a good point, Ty. It's one of the best questions, because I'm not, you know, I'm a holistic viewed practitioner, but I'm not part of the herd. And, you know, I don't like the way there's a lot of, it's almost sneering and scoffing at people that do chemo. You know, like, you dummy, you know, why would you do that? It has to be the person's own choice, but it should be an informed choice. So, no, they ought to look at the facts and figures. And I don't know why you'd choose to do it, but be honest, a lot of people get frightened, or they want to hedge their bets. You know, well, I'll do it, and maybe I can take vitamins and I'll be okay. I don't think that's enough, but it is true that if you use a proper holistic health approach, the kind I've been talking about, you know, change to really killer nutrition, take lots of antioxidants. I mean, antioxidants will protect you against chemo and radiation. That's what it does. It knocks off all kinds of free radicals, you know, as it's going to the tumor. That hits off all kinds of toxic reactive oxygen species, which could be mopped up, and then they won't hurt you so much. So it's possible to protect yourself. This is perhaps the best way of saying it quickly. You can protect yourself against the damaging side effects of the orthodox therapy if you want to do that. And as I told you before, over a 10-year period, not one of my patients lost their hair, even though they were taking, you know, the notorious ones like doxorubicin and things like that. And yet they recovered. So, you know, the oncologist's silly story that will stop the chemotherapy working is nonsense. It was just as poisonous as ever, but the person was taking steps to protect themselves and didn't even lose their hair. So that's a valuable tip, you know, if a person really wants to go that route.
Do you ever recommend fasting?
Oh yeah,
for
absolutely.
For health and for cancer patients.
Absolutely. You know, and you just brought that up. And so just talking about the ketogenic cleanse, I mean, it is a fast. And I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. It's something I do every single day. And I think it's a critical piece of a cancer-killing diet. So for myself, you know, really when we break down fasting, I want all our listeners to understand this. I look at a building phase and a cleansing phase. So our building phase is a time between our first meal of the day and our last meal of the day. Okay, so the typical American, they might eat at 8 a.m. and finish eating at 8 p.m. So it's about a 12-hour building phase. And the cleansing phase would be time from our last meal to our first meal. Okay, that's like a 1-to-1 ratio. In our society today, we've got so much toxicity that it's that much more important that we have a greater cleansing phase than building phase. On top of that, the great thing is when we're on this ketogenic diet, our hormones become balanced. Insulin and leptin, which is our satiety hormone, so it helps us say that we're no longer hungry, we're satisfied. They become very balanced, our body becomes very sensitive to it. So we're really not as hungry. And so for myself, I like to have anywhere between a 16 to 18 hour and sometimes even a 24-hour cleansing phase on a regular basis. Okay, like we're doing this interview here, it's 11:30, 12 o'clock. I haven't eaten anything yet today. I worked out this morning, and you know what? My blood sugar is extremely stable. I feel really good. I feel really mentally clear. Now, I'll typically eat around 1 o'clock or so, and then finish eating by, let's say, 6, 7 o'clock. And so that's really my building phase. And so I've gotten all the nutrients I need, but my body's also been able to really cleanse and detoxify as I've gone through this cleansing phase. And on the cleansing phase, like for example, the fasting this morning, I've drank probably about a half gallon of water so far today. So the water is key because I want to move toxins out of my body. I don't want them to just recirculate as they're being released as my body's breaking down fat cells. And so intermittent fasting is a very, very powerful strategy that's been shown to improve brain function, improve lean body tissue, so your percentage of muscle to body fat. It's been shown to basically to improve almost every aspect of your health. And so very, very profound when it comes to killing off cancer cells in your body too. And sometimes we'll recommend longer fasts and longer cleanses, but I think something that most people can do, unless you have a state of adrenal exhaustion or extreme adrenal fatigue, which some people do, unless that's the case, I always highly recommend going on a ketogenic intermittent fasting lifestyle because of the profound effects it has on destroying cancer cells in your body, regulating your hormones, and improving overall brain function. So very profound effects with that.
Why is it that doctors are not trained on nutrition, in your opinion?
You know, in my opinion, I really think that the pharmaceutical and the insurance industry really control the education process through medical school. And, you know, those industries really don't benefit from people living healthy lifestyles, unfortunately. And so the emphasis on nutrition, exercise, things like that, I mean, it's scattered. Whatever nutrition they do get, oftentimes it's, you know, it's really old nutrition. It's this whole low-fat paradigm. And, you know, it really focuses on processed foods and things like that. But ultimately, they're really not educated on this. And again, I think it has to do with just the pharmaceutical industry. And obviously, their focus is making drugs the major solution to every health problem.
And I think that you're onto something there. You're not the first person that's told me that either. It's funny that you mentioned the low-fat diet. Before we came here today, we were at breakfast, and I was talking about that. I used to be a competitive bodybuilder, and that's all we did. We ate low-fat diets. Now, they may have been highly processed, junk food, but as long as they were low-fat, even if they were just off the charts on the glycemic index with sugars, if they were low-fat, bodybuilders thought they were good. This was back in the 90s, of course. Now, some people still do. Some people still think that low-fat diet's good, when in actuality, can you talk about the importance of good fats in keeping you healthy?
Absolutely. Fats should really be the priority with our nutrition plan. The reason why is that we have 75 trillion cells, and all the cells have a double fatty acid layer around every single cell in your body. And it's extremely key. It's called the cell membrane. It's extremely key for hormonal responses, extremely key for just having good, healthy hormone function, good, healthy neurological function in your system. So the communication process between cells is dependent upon this outer ring of fat. And so we need the fats to help replace those. Also, on top of that, a low-fat diet is going to prioritize carbohydrate. And the carbohydrate breaks down into sugar. And sugar, when your blood sugar is all over the place, that really creates a breeding ground for opportunistic infections, for cancer growth, like we're going to talk about later, for all different types of issues. And so utilizing good fats as your primary energy source helps your body produce something called ketones. It's a ketogenic diet, and those ketones are actually a preferred fuel for your body, and especially when you become what we call keto adapted or fat adapted, where your body just becomes so good it preferentially uses these fatty acids, these ketone bodies, your blood sugar stays extremely stable. And that reduces inflammatory processes in your body. It helps you have better mental, emotional balance, so you think more clearly, you have better memory. Everything in your life really improves because your sugar is stable. You don't have these bumps, these ups and downs, these insulin surges. And so your emotions, again, are going to be more balanced. Everything is going to be more balanced. Your body's going to be able to handle and tolerate stress more effectively. And really, the hallmark of successful aging is being able to adapt effectively to stress. And so I think a high, good fat diet is really, really key for that. And so with these low-fat diets, they really don't discriminate between good fats and bad fats. It's just take all the fats out. They really typically don't discriminate between types of carbohydrates, although sometimes they'll tell you go low glycemic, using a lot of whole grains, things like that. Other people choose high protein diets, but really protein and the carbohydrates both break down into sugar in your system. And that stored sugar will stimulate higher levels of inflammation in your body. And what we're trying to do is really control inflammation, and a high good fat diet really helps with that.
Inflammation is the key,
yeah,
isn't it? As far as many disease processes, they start with inflammation in the cells, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, cancer is clearly one of those. So inflammation is really a system. It's really it's a response of our body, because we know that opportunistic infection is what's killed more people in the history of mankind than anything else. Inflammation is our body's response to protect us from a systemic infection. So inflammation is a smart response from our body. It's an intelligent response. However, most of the time we're not at risk for chronic systemic infection. So we've got to control that inflammatory process. And so the food that we put in our body, the way that we think, the way that we carry ourselves, move our body, the toxic load we put on our system, all of these things play a very important role with our body's ability to modulate or coordinate that inflammatory response.
You mentioned with the ketosis and the ketogenic diet. To me, it sounds almost like the Atkins diet, if you remember from 20 years ago or so when the Atkins diet was real popular.
Yep.
Is it the same thing as the Atkins diet, or what is different when you hear the ketogenic diet versus the old Atkins diet that a lot of bodybuilders that I knew back in the 90s went from the low-fat diet to the Atkins diet, where they were literally guys that were at the gym were working out, eating cheese and bacon and peanut butter in between sets.
Yep.
What's the difference between these two types of diets?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really glad you brought that up, because in general, Atkins diet is a ketogenic diet. It does stimulate ketone development. And the way that some individuals teach it, it's still, they're almost identical. However, when we're really trying to promote optimal health, we've got to make some differentiations from the Atkins diet. So where Atkins went right was his approach with a low carbohydrate diet, getting our body running off the ketones. So I'm in total agreement with him about that, keeping our body very sensitive to insulin. Very, very important. However, where I disagree with him was he really had no regulation on the kind of fats that you put into your body. And we want to really focus on good fats as opposed to bad fats. So most people in our society assume that saturated fat is a bad fat. What we know is that actually saturated fat is one of the most healthiest fats we can be putting in our body. The fats we really want to avoid are high omega-6 fats from refined vegetable oils and also from factory farmed animal meats. So that's a big one. And then of course, trans fats or man-made fats. And so we certainly want to make sure we're avoiding those things. And so we're going to load up on good fats, things like avocados, things like coconut oil, butter from grass-fed cows, okay? Individuals that can tolerate dairy protein. If they can tolerate casein, we're going to use things like cheese, raw cheese from grass-fed cows, fermented dairy drinks from, again, grass-fed cows. There's a huge difference between when a cow is fed grass and grains. A grain-fed cow actually grows much larger and produces a lot more dairy. In fact, they produce about 20 to 30,000 pounds of dairy in a year, a grain-fed cow. A grass-fed cow produces about 3,000 to 5,000 pounds. There's a huge difference in yield. Now the grain-fed cow, though, the grains themselves are high in this omega-6 fat. And omega-6 fat causes inflammation in our body. So the dairy that's coming from a grain-fed cow is very high in omega-6, very low in omega-3. That's going to be inflammatory. And that inflammatory process, high omega-6, low omega-3, provides a ripe environment for cancer cell development in our body. So we definitely want to stay away from commercially raised animal products and animals that were fed grains. We want to stay away from that. But we do want the grass-fed animal products because they have a lot of omega-3s, an ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s. Also, grass-fed dairy has a molecule called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which many researchers are finding is a potent anti-carcinogen. There's also other great nutrients in there, For example, the major fat that's in grass-fed dairy is called butyric acid. Butyric acid is a preferred fuel source for healthy gut microbes in your system, and it helps your intestinal cells to develop and actually to strengthen. So that way we don't develop problems like leaky gut syndrome and ulcerations in our gut and things like that, which is extremely important for helping our immune system. 70% of our immune system's in our gut, and if we have damage to our gut, we're going to have a lot of immune system disorders, which could include cancer and other autoimmune diseases. So this grass-fed raw dairy can have an incredible effect at helping the gut to heal and seal and to control itself well. So that's why it's such a good fat source we want to include. We also want to include things like extra virgin olive oil, healthy seeds like flaxseed, hemp seeds, chia seeds. We talked about coconut products. That should be an absolute staple. Coconut is a superfood. Very anti-inflammatory and just powerful for our body. So these are the kind of good fats we want to focus on. We want to stay away from, again, Atkins never differentiated between grass-fed and grain-fed. So it was a lot of commercial animal products using lard and bacon and things like that. And the other aspect of it is that bacon, I am really not a big fan of, just from the perspective that it is cooked at very high temperatures. And it may be nitrate-free, which is certainly a better one to go with. But when you cook meat at a very high temperature, you're going to produce a lot of carcinogenic products. Things like heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, acrylamide, and these are known to cause cancer growth in our body. And so high heat or highly cooked, highly processed animal products, even if it's properly raised, can also be a factor with cancer cell development. So we want to look for animal products that have been minimally processed, and when we cook them, we want to cook them more medium rare, so a lower temperature, and just cooking them for less time, so that way we produce less of those heterocyclic amines. And there are a lot of different strategies that people can apply with marinades and things like that to utilize the animal products and minimize the production of carcinogenic chemicals. One last thing with the difference between Atkins and an anti-cancer ketogenic approach, Atkins really never differentiated with chemicals and sweeteners. And so it was really a high chemical diet because you would use things like aspartame and Splenda and stuff like that. On a cancer killing or an anti-cancer ketogenic diet, we want very, very pure sources of nutrients. So we want it to be extremely nutrient rich, lots of antioxidants from things like herbs, things like low glycemic sweeteners, like even squeezing fresh lemon on things will provide a ton of antioxidants. Sweeteners are going to be things like stevia, which is an all-natural sweetener. That's going to work much better. Xylitol, perhaps, for some individuals that can digest that well. A lot of times people have leaky gut issues or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth issues and are not able to handle the sugar alcohols, but that's a possible sweetener on a ketogenic diet. But we're going to stay away from the chemical-based agents and go with really natural agents. We also, again, want to use a lot of herbs. Herbs can provide good flavor and a ton of antioxidants. And really on the Atkins diet, there was very little emphasis on herbs or really antioxidants in general. And on the anti-cancer ketogenic diet, we do take from Atkins, hey, this whole ketogenic approach, but we also want it to be extremely nutrient rich and really focus on getting a lot of antioxidants into the body.
The cancer diagnosis, people are terrified, and they don't necessarily have to be. There is hope. So talk about the importance of hope.
Absolutely. I think, no matter where you're at in your life, it's so critical to have a faith foundation, really to have a faith foundation. And the faith foundation should be this: no matter what happens in your life, no matter what diagnosis, no matter what circumstances take place, that you are blessed, and that you are called to be prosperous and victorious. And that's the way I live my life, and I really think there's a lot of advantage in that. If you let circumstances run your life, you're going to be living in fear all day long. And when you live in fear, you're constantly overstimulating your adrenal glands. And when you do that, your body produces a lot of cortisol, a lot of stress hormone. And that stress hormone wears down your immune defense in your gut. And then your gut becomes damaged. And when your gut becomes damaged, now it creates a whole inflammatory spiral in your body. It will throw off your hormones. It'll make you crave the sugars. It'll provide a breeding ground for opportunistic infections. And you get this whole negative spiral of health effects that are going to lead you down a route to chronic disease. And so there's a huge difference between living with hope and living with a lot of love